Today we are going to be primarily covering oral presentations. These are presentations that you would be giving to the public in a public setting, like a classroom, or if you've done research, perhaps to people coming to see your research or wanting to know more about it, such as like in a research colloquium or other present areas where you might need to present. So in college, you will likely have to give a presentation at least once in your time there. Of course, this could be on a topic that you've researched, such as what you've been doing with your research essays, or if you do decide to go into a research field, a study you've conducted, or things like that. Or it could simply be on a topic you've studied in class. You may end up presenting on a specific book if you're in an English class, or a specific chapter in your textbook, or things like that. But how do you make an effective presentation compared to an ineffective presentation? And how do you utilize programs like PowerPoints or Google Slides to help communicate your information? That's what we're going to be talking about today. So, for preparing your subject for presentation, most presentations in college you have to do will only be for a short time, about a minute to 15 minutes long. I have had a few assignments in the past personally in my own experience, where I've had to present for 20 or 25 minutes. I think the longest one I ever had was I had to present for over an hour in college, whenever I was doing a teaching demo. But therefore, because usually presentations are short, because usually, there's always exceptions, but usually presentations are short, it's important to understand what information is important to understand the topic you're presenting on, and what topics aren't as pertinent and could be considered to be filler. When it comes to figuring out how much information you need to fill a presentation, keep in mind that we only speak about 100 to 150 words per minute. From there, you can figure out about how much you'll need to write or to speak to fill the time that you'll need to present. So the first thing you really need to do is you need to sit down and you need to do your research, or you need to read through what you're going to be presenting. But once you have the important areas identified that you'd like to cover, you can begin writing what you'd like to speak during your presentation. Timing yourself reading it aloud can help you understand where you may need to remove or add information. If it turns out that you are over time, so let's say your presentation is 10 minutes. If it turns out that you are over time, you can identify areas where you may need to remove information, where that information is not as important. If you are under time, if you need to fill more time, you can utilize and talk about the non-pertinent parts of your research if it is an instance where you have covered all of the important areas that you would like to address. Remember that whenever you are presenting, you talk much faster whenever you present. So don't be afraid to, well, not to be afraid to, but don't be afraid to talk, but don't be afraid if you are about 30 seconds to a minute over time for your presentation. Now, don't rely on this. If you do talk faster, but if you are like 5 minutes over on your presentation, you need to remove things. But if you are about 30 seconds to even a minute over time, just keep in mind that you do talk faster, so you'll probably be on time whenever you present. And you do get faster each time you present your material, which you will want to practice. So keep that in mind. If you need more time and you don't want to add information, don't be afraid to pause for a moment to recollect yourself, and to allow for information to sink in. People do need time to process what you are speaking. Because of this, it's important for you to take a moment to pause. To pause every now and then primarily after you finish a big point, as this will allow you a chance to either just figure out your slide, swap note cards, things like that. It'll give your audience a chance to process what you're speaking. If you get stuck on a topic, don't be afraid to pause for a moment to just kind of recollect yourself. It's much better than if you forget what you wanted to say for a second, as saying that. Adding in an or an Take a second to pause, take a breath, and figure out where you need to go next. Next, you really want to avoid saying things that are known as filler words. Things like things like that. Sounds that try to make it seem like you're talking in a very long line, like in a very long speech, but are actually just filler words. We use them all the time whenever we are speaking normally. However, in a presentation, they can lead to issues with understanding. So it's better to take that moment to pause than to go ahead and say those. But inevitably, because we use them so much, you will inevitably say one or two. Now, after you get done writing your speech, you can begin practicing your presentation. I would recommend beginning by reading through your presentation out loud and timing yourself to make sure you don't need to add more or less to your presentation. You want to have your presentation in front of you for this period of time. This way, you can read it through and figure out if you need to remove or add things with it. But don't feel like you are bound to what you have written. Your presentation should be the culmination of your own research that you are presenting. Therefore, or the culmination of what you have learned that you are presenting. Therefore, focus on presenting it as a whole. You aren't bound to what you have written down. But after you feel comfortable reading through your presentation and you know that your timing is good, or at least is relatively set, you can begin practicing without your written presentation in front of you. You want to place it to the side so that if you need to remind yourself of what you need to talk about next, you can. But you should try to aim to avoid relying on looking at your paper. After you feel comfortable presenting without your writing in front of you, or you feel like you know the main beats of your presentation, you can begin timing yourself just presenting. Don't be afraid to check your notes. You most likely can have note cards for your presentation, and we'll talk about that in a second, if you need. But again, do your best to avoid doing so. You don't want to rely on your note cards or things like your slides. Your slides are there, your note cards are there as a spice, kind of as a way to both remind yourself and a way to add to your presentation. Now, on the day of your presentation, make sure you're well rested, take a deep breath, and remember you got this. Also remember that people will enjoy your presentation regardless of if you've messed up in some way. Saying or stumbling over your words, accidentally going to the wrong slide, things like that. You're going to be a harsher critic to yourself than those around you. Those around you will not be as harsh of a critic. Remember that people are more afraid of public speaking than they are of death. People are more afraid to speak in public than they are of dying. Therefore, you are doing something impressive. You are doing something that is very impressive, even if it seems small. Don't be a harsher critic to yourself than those around you. Those around you probably won't even notice any of your mess-ups, that if you do any. One thing you'll most likely be able to bring with you to your presentation is note cards. These are small cards. These are usually about index card size on which you can write small reminders to help remind you of specific facts. If you need to remember a specific number or a specific statistic or things like that, you can use your note cards to help you to remember the numbers. And they also can help to keep you on track for what you want to cover. If you remember the outlines we do for papers, that's a good way to do your outlines for your presentation. Only instead of having have your specific topic and then have 1 to 2 sentences of main points that you would like to cover for that. Now, your PowerPoint can serve as note cards, but don't rely on reading your PowerPoint during your presentation. It is more effective for you to address the audience in and of itself than to rely on reading your PowerPoint. Now, some tips for presenting. Address the audience. During a big presentation, make sure you're looking forward towards the audience more than you're looking towards your PowerPoint or notes. You really don't want to have a presentation where you are just looking down consistently. You want to aim and to connect with your audience. You can choose a specific person in the audience to address and just kind of focus on. This isn't something you'd mention, but you can choose a specific person to address, maybe a friend, something like that. Or if you aren't really big on eye contact, if that's something that makes you more nervous, you can choose an area of the audience to address if that were to make you feel more comfortable. If you're going to choose an area, I would recommend choosing towards the back of the room instead of the front of the room. That way you make sure that you are projecting so that that person in the back can hear you. Now, try to make eye contact with your audience, but you don't, and it's also isn't required if eye contact makes you nervous or uncomfortable. You also don't want too much eye contact, if that makes sense. Just occasionally check in with your audience. You don't have to stare your audience down, but you also shouldn't be continually looking down at your notes type of a deal. Also, make sure your presentation follows a logical path. What I would recommend is building on simple terms that need to be addressed, definitions, concepts, etc. Then present on the bigger topics that incorporate those terms. Think of your presentation as a story. You wouldn't start a story in the middle, and you wouldn't start your presentation in the deepest portion of your topic. Also, don't be afraid to talk passionately about a subject. People want to see your enthusiasm for the topic you're presenting, and will remember your presentation more than if you just presented it formally. Also, if you talk with your hands a lot like I do, don't be afraid to gesture during a presentation. Nonverbal communication can really help to emphasize your points. If you have a question and answer period after your presentation, some presentations have it, some presentations don't. It depends upon your teacher. This is where you can talk about parts you were unable to include in your presentation. Don't panic while waiting for people to ask you a question. If you end your presentation and your teacher asks if anybody has any questions, and it's dead quiet, don't panic. They may just need a minute to take in what you've presented and formulate a question. If you get no questions, don't panic. What it most likely means is that you have effectively presented what you set out to present in a way that was incredibly understandable to your audience. Basically, if you have a period of silence in your presentation, don't panic. You probably did very well. Now, let's talk about how to make an effective PowerPoint. There's a few tricks for how to make a PowerPoint effective. Now, you could just paste paragraphs of your speech to your PowerPoint, but that would be ineffective. You should limit the number of words on your PowerPoint. This is going to contain about 3 to 5 main points on one slide. Less if you expand heavily upon those points. Remember that you are there to explain your slides. You can talk more about what's on them. You don't have to include every single word you're going to say. You don't have to be like, on your slide, you don't have to be like, so today we're going to talk about mathematics. You can just introduce the topic yourself and have the word mathematics on your PowerPoint. Use contrasting colors for the presentation's text and background. Dark text on a dark background is unreadable. Same as light text on a light background. There is a reason why I have white text on this navy blue background for our PowerPoint. It's because that is the most readable. If I were to change the color to, say, black, it would be very difficult for you to actually read the text on here. Now, there is a limit for this. I have seen some PowerPoints in my day. I have seen one that was green, that was a green background on red text. The presentation was on Christmas, but I recommend not doing that. What I would recommend doing is keeping your text either black or white, depending upon the color of your background. If you have a light background, you would want to use black text. If you have a dark background, you'd want to use white text. Stick to that, and you can vary the color of the background however much you want. Preferably avoid neon. Neon will tire your audience's eyes. You also want to make sure your text is in a readable font and is in a readable size. It may need to be bigger for people in the back to see. So in a presentation like this where I'm recording the screen, it's easier to read the text. However, if this is in a presentation setting where your PowerPoint may be projected onto a screen, you may need to make the text bigger. People generally will recommend about 30 point if you are doing a presentation. Your PowerPoint itself, if you use a template, will have generally some recommended font size that it will start out in. This is generally about 18 if you're using Google Slides. Just make sure it is big enough for somebody in the back of your classroom to read, or for somebody who's about 5-10 feet away to read. Probably closer to 10 feet away. Last couple of tips. Don't be afraid to use more slides if you have to. If you have a more detailed presentation, you will need more slides than somebody whose presentation is on a more general topic. Generally, though, you should try to stick to about 10 to 15 slides for a shorter presentation. If you have a longer presentation, you can afford more slides, but generally you should try to stick to about 10 to 15 slides. If you have a graph or other important image that you want your viewer to look at or you're going to be talking about for a while, you may want to put its image and its explanation on another slide. This will make your graph more visible to those who are sitting further away, for those who are sitting in the back, for example, where they might not be able to see a very tiny image. If you were to have like a very tiny image right here, they may not be able to see it. But if you were to put it onto its own slide where it has all of this space to exist, they'll be able to see it, and they'll be able to understand what point you're trying to make with that slide or with that image better than if you were to, say, put it right here and then try to use it as an example. But with that, I do believe that's going to be the lesson for today. If you have any questions, please go ahead and email me or send me a text, and I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.